All right, you beautiful bastards, strap yourselves in because today we're diving headfirst into this glorious shit show that is elections.
Elections!
You think you know how this democracy sausage gets made?
Yeah.
Think again. We're going to peel back the layers of this greasy onion and expose all the fucked up, fascinating crap you never learned in school.
That's right.
So to help us navigate this labyrinth of bullshit,
Sure.
we've got a real expert in the house, someone who eats, sleeps, and breathes elections.
Well, I wouldn't say.
This motherfucker's probably got ballots for breakfast and voter suppression for dinner.
That's not quite accurate, but I appreciate the enthusiasm.
I'm just messing with you, Doc.
I can tell.
So seriously, though, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
All right, let's cut the crap and get down to brass tacks. We're going deep, folks. I mean, way back to the dawn of this whole democracy thing.
Okay.
To, like, ancient Greece and Rome. Those toga-wearing motherfuckers who supposedly invented this whole voting thing.
Exactly. We're going way back, folks. I mean, imagine picking your leaders by literally drawing straws.
Wait, are you serious?
Sounds batshit crazy, right?
They just picked dudes out of a hat to run their governments.
But that's how the ancient Greeks and Romans, those toga-wearing pioneers of democracy, rolled sometimes.
I need more details on this step.
Okay, so it wasn't exactly a hat.
Okay.
But they did use something called sortition.
Sortition.
Which is basically random selection.
Random selection.
They used it for a lot of important positions in their societies. For example, the Athenians used it to pick members of their council, their juries, even some of their magistrates.
Sortition?
Yeah.
Sounds kind of fancy for just pulling names out of a fishbowl.
Right.
What was their rationale for doing things this way?
Well, they had a few reasons.
Okay.
For one, they saw it as a way to prevent corruption and keep those power-hungry assholes in check.
Keep those assholes in check.
It was all about making sure everyone had an equal chance to get involved in government, not just the same old rich pricks and their cronies.
That actually makes sense.
Right.
Keep the power spread out. Prevent anyone from building up too much of a dynasty.
Right.
But how the hell did we go from picking leaders randomly
Right.
to this whole organized voting system we've got now?
That's a great question. It was a long and messy evolution, my friend. Over centuries, the idea of representative democracy started to emerge, where people elected others to speak for them.
Okay.
Think of it as going from everyone shouting their opinions in a giant mosh pit to having a few designated spokespeople doing the yelling for you.
So, like, we traded chaos for bureaucracy.
Yeah, something like that. But it wasn't always smooth sailing. Even in these early systems, power dynamics still played a huge role.
Yeah.
Like, did you know that in 8th century Bengal, a king named Gopala was elected by a bunch of feudal lords?
So even back then, it was all about who had the biggest dick, right? The most land, the most soldiers,
Exactly.
the shiniest crown.
You got it.
Nothing really changes, does it?
But one of the biggest shifts in how we do elections is who gets to vote. Over time, the right to vote, or suffrage, has expanded to include more and more people.
Yeah, because for a long time, it was just the rich white dudes who got to call the shots.
Yeah.
It's wild to think how many people were excluded from this supposedly democratic process.
Absolutely. And even after universal suffrage was legally mandated for men, there were still all sorts of barriers in place to prevent certain groups from voting. We saw this with the Jim Crow laws in the U.S.
Oh, yeah.
Which were specifically designed to stop Black people from voting. It's a reminder that the fight for equal voting rights has been a long and brutal one.
And in some places, it's still going on. Did you know that in Australia, if you're a prisoner serving 3 years or more, you can't vote?
Right.
It's fucked up, man.
It's definitely a controversial issue. Some people argue that it's a just punishment for committing a crime, while others see it as a form of disenfranchisement that further marginalizes an already vulnerable population.
Okay, let's move on. Before I start ranting about kangaroo courts and drop bears, let's talk about how candidates actually get into these elections.
Yeah, sure.
I mean, it's not like just anyone can stroll in and be like, hey, vote for me, motherfuckers.
You're right. There's a whole process for that called the nomination process.
Okay.
And believe me, it can be a real clusterfuck depending on the system.
Clusterfuck is my middle name. All right, break it down for us.
You've got everything from free-for-all direct democracies where anyone can throw their hat in the ring to party-controlled primaries.
Okay.
Where political parties have a ton of influence over who gets chosen.
So sometimes it's easier to win the whole damn election than it is to even get on the ballot in the first place.
Yeah.
That's messed up.
You're telling me it's all about navigating the rules, playing the game, and sometimes just getting lucky.
Speaking of games,
What?
let's talk about the different ways we actually count the votes.
Mm-hmm.
This is where shit gets really interesting.
Yeah.
And confusing as hell. Hit us with some knowledge bombs about electoral systems.
All right, buckle up. Basically, there are three main types of electoral systems: proportional, majoritarian, and mixed. Proportional systems aim to reflect the overall vote share in the results. So if a party gets, say, 30% of the votes, they should ideally get around 30% of the seats.
This is pretty straightforward.
Right.
What about the other two, majoritarian and mixed?
Majoritarian systems are winner take all. Whoever gets the most votes wins, even if it's not a majority.
Okay.
It's like a race where only the first person across the finish line gets the gold medal, even if they tripped a bunch of other runners along the way. Then you've got mixed systems, which try to combine the best of both worlds, proportional representation, and that winner-take-all vibe.
Okay, my brain's starting to hurt a little.
Yeah.
But this is important shit, people.
Right.
The way we count the votes determines how much your vote actually matters.
Absolutely.
Don't check out on us now.
You're absolutely right. Understanding electoral systems is crucial if you want to be an informed and engaged citizen.
Okay, enough with the technical mumbo-jumbo for a second. Let's talk about the absolute circus that is political campaigns. We're talking billions of dollars, endless speeches.
Oh, yeah?
Attack ads that make you want to gouge your eyes out.
Right.
It's enough to make you want to crawl into a bunker and never come out.
You're preaching to the choir, man. The amount of money spent on campaigns is truly mind-boggling. Like the 2012 U.S. presidential election cost a whopping $7 billion.
There's billions?
$7 billion. That's more money than most of us will see in our lifetimes.
It's insane.
And they're just burning it on political bullshit.
You could be solving world hunger-curing diseases or building schools in every goddamn country, but instead they're spending it on attack ads and rallies where they promise you the moon and deliver a pile of dog shit.
You hit the nail on the head. The sad truth is that campaigns are often more about winning than they are about actually informing voters and having real discussions about the issues. It's all about spin, manipulation, and making your opponent look like a bigger asshole than you.
So basically it's more about bullshit than brains.
You could say that. But hey, let's be fair.
Okay.
Campaigns can also be opportunities for important debates and discussions. Ideally, they should be about helping people understand where candidates stand on the issues and what their plans are for governing.
Yeah. In a perfect world.
Yeah.
But in reality, it's hard to see the forest for the trees when you're constantly being bombarded with propaganda and misinformation.
That's why it's more important than ever to be a critical consumer of information. Do your research, fact-check everything you see and hear, and don't be afraid to question the goddamn narrative.
Words to live by. Okay, let's talk about the timing of these elections. Why do some countries have fixed election dates while others leave it up to the powers that be to decide when we go to the polls?
Right.
It's all about timing, right? Like, who wants to take a test when they're hungover and haven't studied?
That's a great question. There are pros and cons to both approaches. Fixed election dates provide certainty and predictability.
Okay.
Everyone knows when the election is going to happen, so they can theoretically plan accordingly.
Right.
But the downside is that fixed dates can be inflexible.
Right.
What if some crazy shit goes down, like a war or a natural disaster, that makes it difficult or impossible to hold an election on the scheduled date?
Right. So what about the other option where the government gets to choose the election date?
Right.
Doesn't that just reek of potential for manipulation?
It definitely does. In systems where the executive branch chooses the election date, there's always the risk that they'll try to time it to their advantage. They might call an election when they're feeling popular or when the opposition is weak. It's like rigging the game before it even starts.
Okay, let's get into the really dark shit now.
Okay.
The ways elections can be rigged and manipulated.
Right.
Because, let's be real,
Yeah.
this happens all the time, from petty bullshit to full-blown electoral fraud.
Sure.
It's enough to make you lose faith in the whole damn system.
It's a sad reality, but you're right. There are countless ways elections can be compromised, from gerrymandering to ballot stuffing to voter intimidation.
Give us the rundown on how this shit goes down, Professor.
Well, gerrymandering is a classic. It's basically manipulating electoral boundaries to favor a particular party or candidate. They draw the lines in such a way that they pack their opponent's voters into a few districts while spreading their own voters across many districts.
So they're basically choosing their voters before the voters even get a chance to choose them.
Pretty much. It's a way to rig the system from the ground up.
That's some next-level fuckery.
It is.
What else do they have up their sleeves?
Then you've got ballot stuffing, which is literally what it sounds like.
Yeah.
Stuffing ballot boxes with fake votes. They can add extra ballots, change votes on existing ballots, or just straight up discard ballots from people who voted for the opposition.
Wait, that shit still happens?
Yeah.
I thought we were past that with all our fancy voting machines and electronic whatnots.
You'd be surprised. Ballot stuffing is still a problem in many parts of the world, even in countries that claim to have advanced electoral systems.
Damn, that's depressing. Okay, what about voter intimidation?
Right.
I imagine that can get pretty nasty.
Right. It definitely can. Voter intimidation can take many forms, from threats of violence to spreading false information about voting procedures to challenging voters' eligibility at the polls. It's all about making people afraid to vote, especially those who are already marginalized or vulnerable.
That's messed up.
Yeah.
It's like they're trying to silence the voices of the people they don't want to hear.
Exactly. Voter intimidation is a serious threat to free and fair elections.
All right, let's talk about the worst of the worst.
Okay.
Sham elections.
Right.
These are the ones where the outcome is basically predetermined.
Yeah.
And the whole thing is just a giant dog and pony show. It's like putting lipstick on a pig.
Right.
It might look a little prettier, but it's still a pig.
You said it. Sham elections are sadly a reality in many parts of the world.
Yeah.
These are elections held purely for show, with no real political choice or impact on the outcome.
Give us some examples of these so-called elections.
Well, you've got places like North Korea, where the leader consistently wins with near unanimous support. But let's be real, that's because anyone who dares to dissent is likely to end up in a labor camp or worse. Then you have countries like Russia, where opposition candidates are routinely harassed, silenced, or imprisoned. It's basically impossible for them to mount a serious challenge against the powers that be.
So it's all just a big fat lie.
Pretty much. It's about maintaining a facade of legitimacy even though the whole thing is rigged.
It's a joke, man.
Yeah.
A slap in the face to anyone who believes in democracy. What's the point of even holding an election if the outcome is already decided?
It's all about optics.
Yeah.
About trying to convince the world that they have the support of the people, even if they have to manufacture that support through coercion and fraud.
It's a mindfuck, that's for sure.
Okay.
Okay, before we wrap up this part of our deep dive, let me hit you with a question that's been brewing in my mind.
Okay.
Are elections, even in countries that think they're all democratic and shit, just a fancy way of choosing our elites?
Oh, that's a great question.
Is it all just a big club?
Right.
And we're not in it.
That's a question that's been debated for centuries, my friend.
Yeah.
And it's a damn good one. Some people argue that elections, even when they seem fair on the surface, actually favor elites and don't give everyone an equal chance of getting into those positions of power.
So is it like a rigged game from the start?
There's definitely a case to be made that the system is skewed in favor of those with wealth connections and access to resources. I mean, running for office is insanely expensive. You need money for campaigning, advertising, travel staff, the whole 9 yards. If you're not already rich or connected to people with deep pockets, you're basically screwed from the get-go.
It's like trying to climb Mount Everest in flip-flops.
Exactly.
Wow.
And then there's the whole issue of name recognition. Voters are more likely to vote for someone they've heard of,
Right.
even if they don't know jack shit about their policies or qualifications.
Makes sense.
It's all about branding and marketing, just like selling a product.
So the media can basically make or break a candidate.
Absolutely. They have a huge influence over who gets covered, how they're portrayed, and what issues get discussed.
Damn, this whole election thing is starting to feel like one giant illusion. We think we have a choice, but are we really just picking from a pre-selected menu of elites?
It's a question worth pondering, and it's one that we need to keep asking ourselves if we want to create a truly democratic system where everyone has an equal shot at participating and making their voices heard.
Okay, that's it for part 1 of our deep dive into the wild world of elections.
Yeah.
We've covered a lot of ground, from ancient Greece to modern-day shenanigans. And let's be real, it's enough to make you want to grab a bottle of whiskey and scream into the void. But don't despair just yet, you glorious bastards. Join us for part 2, where we'll explore some potential solutions to this democratic dumpster fire.
We'll see you there.
We'll delve into electoral reform, alternative voting systems, and the power of grassroots movements to challenge the status quo. Stay tuned.
All right.
We'll be right back.
Sounds good. Welcome back to our deep dive into this glorious clusterfuck we call elections.
Yeah, last time we
Last time we left off
on a pretty bleak note.
On a pretty bleak note, questioning whether elections are just a fancy way for the elites to jerk each other off
Yeah.
and maintain their grip on power.
We went down the rabbit hole and saw some pretty shady shit.
Yeah.
From gerrymandering to ballot stuffing
Right.
to sham elections that make a mockery of the whole democratic process.
It can be pretty disheartening, I get it. But before we all drown ourselves in a vat of cheap whiskey and despair,
Yeah.
let's explore some potential solutions, some ways to make elections a little less shitty, and maybe, just maybe, inject some actual fairness into this rigged game.
All right, Professor Hope, I'm all ears.
Yeah.
Hit me with your best shot. What can we do to level the playing field and make sure our votes actually count for something?
Well, one of the biggies is electoral reform. It's about tweaking the rules of the game,
Cool.
closing those loopholes that let the powerful fuck over everyone else,
Yeah.
and making the system more resistant to manipulation. There are a ton of ideas floating around out there, but some of the most popular include campaign finance reform, ranked choice voting, and proportional representation.
Okay, let's unpack this shit.
Yeah.
Campaign finance reform sounds about as exciting as watching paint dry.
Right.
But I have a feeling it's kind of important.
You're goddamn right it is. In many countries, including the good old US of A, corporations and billionaires can basically drown political campaigns in a tidal wave of cash. It's legal bribery, plain and simple.
Ah, so the politicians are bought and paid for before they even take office.
Right.
Makes you wonder who they're actually representing, doesn't it?
Exactly. Campaign finance reform aims to limit the influence of money in politics, whether it's through spending caps, public financing of campaigns, or forcing those shady motherfuckers to be more transparent about who's donating to whom.
So it's about taking the power back from the fat cats and putting it back in the hands of the people. I could dig it.
Precisely. It's about leveling the playing field and making sure that elections are decided by ideas and policies, not by who can afford to buy the most airtime and smear their opponents with the nastiest attack ads.
Okay, what about ranked choice voting? That sounds kind of kinky. How does that work?
It's actually pretty straightforward. Ranked choice voting, also known as instant runoff voting, is a system where voters rank candidates in order of preference.
Okay.
So you pick your favorite, then your second favorite, and so on. If no candidate snags a majority of first choice votes, the candidate with the fewest votes gets booted off the island, and their votes are redistributed based on the voters' second choices. It's like a game of musical chairs, but with ballots instead of seats.
I'm starting to see how this could work.
Yeah.
It's like even if your first choice goes down in flames, your vote still has a chance to make a difference.
Exactly. It helps eliminate the spoiler effect, where a third-party candidate can split the vote and accidentally help a less popular candidate win. It also encourages candidates to appeal to a wider range of voters because they need to be someone's second or third choice to have a shot at winning.
So it's like a strategy game for democracy,
Yeah.
forcing everyone to think a little harder about who they want in charge.
You got it. It makes candidates work their asses off to build broader coalitions and appeal to voters beyond their hardcore base. It's about compromise, baby.
All right, now let's tackle proportional representation.
Okay.
This one sounds like it could really fuck with my brain.
Don't worry, it's not as complicated as it sounds.
Yeah.
The basic idea is that the number of seats a party wins in an election should be roughly proportional to the number of votes they get. So if a party scores 40% of the vote, they should ideally snag around 40% of the seats.
Okay, that makes sense.
It's
Seems a hell of a lot fairer than our current system, where one party can win a majority of seats with a tiny sliver of the total votes.
Exactly. Proportional representation, or PR for short, is designed to make sure that the makeup of the legislature actually reflects the diversity of views and opinions out there in the real world. It also gives smaller parties and minority groups a fighting chance of being represented instead of being completely shut out by the two big gorillas in the room.
So more voices,
Right.
more perspectives,
Yep.
less domination by the same old political dinosaurs.
Yeah.
I'm into it.
Right on ours. Plus, PR systems tend to lead to more coalition governments,
Yeah.
which means different parties have to work together to get shit done.
Yeah.
It forces them to find common ground and compromise instead of just yelling at each other and throwing tantrums like a bunch of toddlers fighting over a broken toy.
Man, a little cooperation and compromise in politics. What a concept. But let's be real. Electoral reform is just one piece of the puzzle. We can't just sit around waiting for the powers that be to magically fix the system for us. What can regular people do to shake things up and demand better from our so-called leaders?
You're damn right. This is where grassroots movements come in. It's about people getting off their asses,
Yeah.
organizing, raising hell, and making it clear that we're not going to tolerate this bullshit anymore.
So we're talking protests,
Right.
petitions, that kind of stuff.
Exactly. It's about citizen activism, about holding those in power accountable and pushing for reforms that actually benefit the people, not just the elite assholes who are already lining their pockets. We also need to be informed and engaged voters.
Easy for you to say, Professor. Most people are too busy trying to survive, pay their bills, and avoid getting eaten by rabid squirrels to keep up with all the political
Oh,
mumbo-jumbo?
I hear you, man. It can be overwhelming. But there are resources out there to help us stay informed. We can follow reputable news sources, join advocacy groups, and participate in online forums and discussions where people are actually trying to figure this shit out.
So it's about educating ourselves and finding ways to amplify our voices,
Right.
even if it's just yelling at our phones and posting angry rants on social media.
You got it. We need to understand the issues, know our rights, and be prepared to call out injustice and corruption wherever we see it. And most importantly, we need to fucking vote.
Yeah.
It sounds obvious, but so many people don't bother either because they feel like their vote doesn't matter or they're just disillusioned with the whole damn system.
Apathy's a bitch for sure. But we can't let cynicism and disillusionment win. We gotta fight for our right to have a say in how things are run.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Every vote counts. Every voice matters. It's time to stop bitching about the problem and start being part of the solution.
Okay, let's take a quick breather and refill our cynicism tanks. Join us for part 3 of our deep dive, where we'll explore some even more radical ideas for democratic reform,
Right.
from sortition to deliberative democracy.
Okay.
Shit's about to get wild,
Sounds good.
so don't touch that dial.
Hey.
All right, you beautiful degenerates. Welcome back to the final round of our deep dive into this glorious shit show that is elections. We've slogged through the historical muck, exposed the flaws of our current systems, and even flirted with some kinky reform ideas. Now it's time to crank things up to 11 and explore some truly radical, mind-bending alternatives to this whole democracy circus.
That's right, folks. Buckle up, because we're about to venture into the uncharted territories of democratic experimentation.
Uncharted territory.
We're talking about solutions so radical they make Che Guevara look like a goddamn Republican.
All right, hit me with your best shot, Professor. What's the craziest, most out there idea you got in your arsenal?
Well, how about we ditch this whole voting thing altogether and bring back that ancient Greek practice of sortition?
Sortition, isn't that where they pick their leaders randomly, like pulling names out of a hat?
Yeah.
Sounds like a recipe for disaster, doesn't it?
It might sound batshit crazy in our modern world, but hear me out. There's a growing movement of scholars and activists who believe that sortition could be the key to revitalizing our broken democracies.
Okay, Professor, I'm listening. Explain this whole sortition thing like I'm a 5-year-old who just chugged a Red Bull.
All right, so imagine a world where instead of electing our representatives, we just randomly select ordinary citizens to serve in government. It could be for a specific term, a particular committee, or even the entire goddamn legislature. It's like jury duty, but for politics.
So instead of slick politicians kissing babies and making empty promises,
Right.
we'd have average Joes and Janes running the show.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm all for shaking things up, but wouldn't that just lead to chaos and incompetence?
That's a valid concern, but the beauty of sortition is that it creates a truly representative government.
Okay.
We break free from the stranglehold of money special interests and those goddamn political parties.
Yeah.
And with proper training and support, ordinary citizens can absolutely become effective decision makers. Let's be real.
Right.
Our current system isn't exactly overflowing with competence and wisdom, is it?
Touche. Okay, let's say we're crazy enough to give this sortition thing a whirl. How the hell would it actually work in practice?
Well, there are a few different models out there.
Okay.
Some folks propose using a simple lottery system, just like jury selection. Others suggest a more sophisticated approach called stratified sampling,
Stratified sampling.
where they carefully design the pool of potential leaders to make sure it reflects the demographics of the population.
Okay.
And then there's the hybrid model,
Okay.
combining sortition with some elements of elections.
So it's still work in progress.
Yeah. But there's potential there.
Yeah.
It's like we're hacking democracy
Right.
and rewriting the code.
Exactly. Sortition is a radical idea, but it's gaining traction as people become increasingly disillusioned with the same old broken promises and political bullshit. It's about time we explored some truly innovative solutions, don't you think?
Damn right. Okay, what other radical ideas are out there in the ether?
Yeah.
Waiting to blow our minds.
Well, there's this concept called deliberative democracy, which is all about creating spaces where citizens can come together, hash out the big issues, and actually try to find some common ground through reasoned discussion and debate.
So like a giant town hall meeting on steroids.
Right.
Where everyone gets to share their opinions and try to convince each other that they're not completely full of shit. That's the gist of it. But with a more structured format and facilitated discussions to make sure that everyone gets a chance to speak their minds and that the conversation stays relatively civil, at least in theory. Deliberative democracy is about moving away from that toxic adversarial us versus them bullshit that's poisoning our political discourse and embracing a more collaborative problem-solving approach.
That sounds pretty utopian, Professor. Are you sure you haven't been hitting the bong a little too hard lately?
Hey, a little weed never hurt anyone.
I know, I know.
But seriously, there are actually real-world examples of deliberative democracy in action, from citizen assemblies to participatory budgeting initiatives.
So it's not just some pipe dream cooked up by academics in their ivory towers.
No.
People are actually trying this shit out in the real world.
Absolutely. And the results are pretty impressive. They're seeing increased civic engagement, more informed policy decisions, and even a reduction in that nasty polarization that's tearing our societies apart.
All right, I'm starting to feel a little glimmer of hope for the future of democracy. Maybe we can actually build something better, something that doesn't make us want to bash our heads against the wall every time we watch the news.
That's the spirit. The key takeaway here is that democracy is not a static concept. It's a living, breathing thing that needs to constantly adapt and evolve if it's going to survive in this crazy, rapidly changing world. And it's up to us, the people, to shape it, mold it, and make it work for us, not the other way around.
Hell yeah. So after this wild ride through the twisted landscape of elections, what's the message you want our listeners to walk away with?
I want them to be critical thinkers, informed voters, and engaged citizens. Don't be afraid to question the status quo, demand better from your leaders, and explore those radical alternatives that might just save our asses. Because ultimately, the power lies with the people.
Damn straight. It's been a hell of a ride, Professor. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the fascinating, frustrating, and often completely fucked up world of elections. To our listeners, remember, democracy isn't a spectator sport. It's a contact sport. Get out there, raise your voices, and fight like hell for a better future. Peace out.